In this segment, I would like to show you a few more capabilities of the lexical spellout rules. I'd like to begin by showing you a table lexical spellout rule. And to do this, I'm going to add a new form. Let's say new form, and I'll call it gender for reasons that you'll see in a minute. I'm just going to make some things up. English doesn't actually need this, but I'm just showing you some of the capabilities of these rules. So we have a new form called gender, and now let's look at the rules. If we look at Grammar Wizard, it's able to do certain things like add a prefix or a suffix or build a table of prefixes or a table of suffixes. But Grammar Wizard isn't able to build a table of circumfixes for us, and that's what I'd like to illustrate right now. So we're going to close Grammar Wizard, and we can write this rule by double-clicking on the form name, and now an empty rule appears. Let's give this rule a name. For example, add gender circumfixes. This will be a table rule, and it's going to supply circumfixes. So we have an empty table right now with just one cell. If I double click on this column header, let's make this column apply to neuter nouns. So I click on the word neuter, and that becomes the column name, and then I select this value, meaning that this column will only apply to neuter nouns. If I rest the cursor on the column header, you'll see a pop-up showing the features that have been specified. Then let's add a column. This one will be for masculine nouns, so I click on the word masculine. That will be the column name, and then select that value. And one more column for feminine nouns. Now let's add the circumfix neut er. To specify a circumfix, we add a prefix, and then a hyphen, and then the suffix. So that will be for neuter nouns. For masculine nouns, let's say mask, lean. And for feminine nouns, let's say fem, like that. And we can add a name for this row, gender circumfixes. I won't specify any values for the row. Okay, this is a table spellout rule. Table spellout rules can have up to 100 layers. This rule will just have one layer, but we need to supply a name for each layer, so let's call it gender. And we need to supply a tag for the circumfix. Let's call it gender as well. Again, I'm just making things up, so I won't add any comments or select a grammar topic. You haven't specified any grammar topics. Would you like to do that now? Let's say no. So we see our rule appear under this form name. And now that rule will be executed. So it took the stem. Let's go back and look at that rule for a minute. I want to comment on this drop down here. It's called the base form. The value stem is selected. That means when this rule is executed, it will begin with the stem. In other words, book, bush, church, man, etc. It will begin with the stem and then add the appropriate circumfix. If we had selected plural, then when this rule is executed, it would get the plural form. In other words, books, bushes, churches, etc. And then add the appropriate circumfix. We want this to begin with the stem, so I'm going to put that back and say OK. We don't want to supply a grammar topic. So we see the stem was selected, book, and then book is neuter, so it adds the prefix neut and the suffix er. Same with bush and church. Now for man, man is tagged as masculine, so it adds the prefix mask and the suffix lean. And for woman, the prefix fem and the suffix een. Now I'd like to write another rule. Let's go back to our rules. And again, I'm going to double click on the form name. This rule is going to add a prefix that consists of reduplicating the first two characters for all nouns that begin with the nasal. So let's call this reduplicate the first two characters for all nouns that begin with the nasal. Now for this, I want to use the form that's in this column already. So I want to begin with the gender form. To specify that the noun must begin with the nasal, okay, this small table here has 5 cells in it, and these 5 cells represent the first 5 characters. If we had said suffix and reduplicate, this table would represent the last 5 characters in the word, but we're going to say prefix, reduplicate. So these represent the first 5 characters in the stem. This leftmost cell represents the very first character in the stem. So we're going to say that it must be a nasal. I've defined a phonetic feature called nasal, and it has just 2 values, yes or no. Okay, we want to reduplicate the first 2 characters. We need a prefix tag. Let's just call this redupe. I'm not going to supply a comment or grammar topic. Now, notice for the base form I selected gender. That means it's going to take this form, and if this form begins with a nasal consonant, then it will reduplicate the first 2 characters. I click OK. We haven't specified any grammar topics. We don't want to do that now. So we see the rule appear in the list. And now, okay, this begins with the nasal noun, so it reduplicates the first 2 characters. Same here, same with mask. It reduplicated MA. Now woman, this fem, doesn't begin with the nasal noun, so the reduplication rule didn't apply to this particular form. I don't want to keep this form, so I'm going to delete it by clicking on the column header and pushing the delete key. Do you want to delete this form? I'll say yes. And that concludes this particular segment.